The grease under Ethan Rivers' fingernails never quite washed out anymore. 6 years of working doubles at Morrison's Auto Repair had stained his hands permanently. The black crescent's a badge he wore without shame. He'd chosen this life. The early mornings, the aching back, the smell of motor oil that clung to his clothes even after 3 washes. He'd chosen it for Lila. His daughter turned 6 today. Ethan stood in the backyard of their rental house, a modest 2-bedroom with peeling paint and a chain-link fence that leaned slightly to the left. The July sun beat down on his neck as he positioned the last folding chair around the picnic table. Tessa had wanted to rent a hall. Her mother had suggested that fancy place downtown with the balloon arches and face painters. But Ethan knew Lila. She didn't want strangers in costumes. She wanted her daddy's burgers and the tire swing he'd hung from the oak tree last summer. You forgot the tablecloth. Tessa appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed. She'd done her hair, pulled it back tight in a way that made her look severe. When had she started looking at him like that? Like he was always forgetting something, always falling short. "It's in the truck," Ethan said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I'll grab it. Mom's bringing one anyway. A nicer one." Of course she was. Nancy had been bringing nicer things for months now. Nicer plates than their chipped ones, nicer wine than the cheap bottles Ethan picked up, nicer opinions about how they should raise their daughter. Ethan felt the familiar tightness in his chest, but swallowed it down. Not today. Today was about Lila. "Where is she?" he asked, scanning the yard. "Inside, watching cartoons. She wanted to wait until everyone got here." Tessa's voice softened slightly when she mentioned their daughter. That was the one thing they still shared, their love for Lila, even if they couldn't find much else to agree on anymore. Ethan walked past his wife into the house. The living room was dim, curtains drawn against the heat. Lila sat cross-legged on the floor in her new purple dress, her dark curls pulled into 2 ponytails that bounced when she turned her head. "Daddy," she scrambled to her feet, and Ethan's heart expanded in his chest the way it always did when she smiled at him like that. Pure, uncomplicated joy. He scooped her up, spinning her once. She giggled to sound like wind chimes. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Is everyone coming? Did you make the burgers?" "The big ones. The biggest ones. Extra cheese, just how you like." She wrapped her small arms around his neck, and Ethan closed his eyes for just a moment, breathing in the smell of her strawberry shampoo. This was what mattered. This right here. The first guests arrived an hour later. Tessa's cousin and her husband, a couple from Ethan's shop, 2 of Lila's school friends with their parents. The yard filled with chatter and laughter. Ethan manned the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs, accepting compliments on his cooking with a modest nod. He was good at this, at least. Providing. Making people full and happy. Lila darted between the adults, her dress already grass-stained at the hem. She climbed the tire swing, played tag with the other kids, her laughter rising above the conversation like music. Ethan watched her between flips of the burgers, his chest tight with something he couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe, or fear that this perfect moment couldn't last. It was past 3 when Nancy arrived. Ethan heard her before he saw her. The distinctive purr of her Lexus, too expensive for a retired real estate agent in a town like this. The engine cut, a door slammed, and then she appeared around the side of the house in a cream pantsuit better suited for a country club than a backyard cookout. Her heels sank slightly into the grass with each step, but she didn't falter. Nancy never faltered. "There's my girl." Nancy's voice cut through the party noise, sharp and bright. She carried a large pink box wrapped in silver ribbon, holding it aloft like a trophy. Lila ran to her grandmother, and Nancy set down the box to embrace her, though Ethan noticed the hug was brief, careful not to wrinkle the suit. "Happy birthday, precious. Grandma brought you something special." Tessa materialized at her mother's elbow, her face transformed into something easier, younger. "Mom, you didn't have to." "Nonsense. It's her birthday." Nancy's eyes flicked to Ethan, who stood at the grill with tongs in hand, and her smile thinned. "Hello, Ethan." "Nancy." The moment stretched, awkward and cold. Then Nancy turned back to Lila, all warmth again. "Should we open it now? I can't wait to see your face." The other conversations quieted as Nancy positioned herself at the head of the picnic table, the pink box centered in front of her like a centerpiece. Lila bounced on her toes, her eyes wide. Ethan set down the tongs and moved closer, something uneasy stirring in his gut. "Go ahead, sweetheart," Nancy said, her voice syrupy. "Grandma picked this out just for you." Lila tore at the ribbon, her small fingers clumsy with excitement. The box opened to reveal a doll. Not just any doll, but an elaborate one with realistic features, glossy brown hair, and a pink dress that matched Lila's. The doll's eyes opened and closed, and when Lila lifted it, a tinny voice emerged from somewhere inside its plastic chest. "I love you, Lila." The adults cooed and clapped. Lila held the doll close, her face split in a grin. "It knows my name." "Of course it does." Grandma made sure it was perfect. Nancy's gaze slid to Ethan again, something triumphant in her expression. "See? I know what little girls want." Ethan stared at the doll. Something about it looked cheap despite the elaborate features. The plastic sheen too glossy, the joints visible and stiff. He opened his mouth to speak, but Tessa was already there, hugging her mother, thanking her profusely. "It's beautiful, Mom. She loves it. Only the best for my granddaughter." Nancy's words were pointed, the unspoken comparison hanging in the air. "Not like what you could afford, Ethan." He turned back to the grill, jaw tight, and flipped a burger that didn't need flipping. The party continued around him, but the ease had gone out of it. He watched Lila show the doll to her friends, watched Nancy hold court at the picnic table, Tessa beside her like a satellite. He'd planned this party for weeks, saved up for the food and the small gift piled on the side table. And somehow Nancy had walked in and made it all feel inadequate in under 5 minutes. But Lila was happy. That's what mattered. The party wound down as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Parents collected their children, thanking Ethan for the food. Lila clutched her new doll as she said goodbye to her friends, and Ethan noticed she'd barely touched the other presents. The doll talked. It knew her name. How could crayons and coloring books compete with that? After everyone left, Ethan cleaned up while Tessa put Lila to bed. He stacked chairs, bagged trash, scraped the grill. The yard looked empty now, trampled grass and paper plates the only evidence of celebration. He was tying off the last trash bag when Tessa came back outside. "She won't let go of the doll," Tessa said. There was something in her voice, amusement but also reproach. "She's sleeping with it." "Kids get attached," Ethan said, hefting the bag. "Mom really outdid herself." There was again the comparison. Ethan straightened, meeting his wife's eyes. "I'm glad Lila's happy. But I'm glad she's happy." Tessa's mouth tightened. "You always do this. Someone tries to do something nice, and you make it weird." "I didn't say anything." "You don't have to. It's all over your face." She turned toward the house, then paused. "My mother loves Lila. She's trying to be a good grandmother. Maybe you could appreciate that instead of looking for problems." Ethan watched her go inside, the screen door banging shut behind her. He stood alone in the darkening yard, the bag of trash in his hand, and felt the distance between them like a physical thing. What had it gotten this bad? Why had they stopped being on the same side? He didn't have an answer. The house was quiet when he went inside. He checked on Lila, opening her door just enough to see her curled under her blankets, the doll tucked against her chest. Her face was peaceful in sleep, and Ethan felt his anger drain away. This was what mattered. His daughter, safe and loved. He closed the door softly and went to bed. The call came at 11:30. Ethan jerked awake to Lila's crying, high and frightened. He was out of bed before Tessa stirred, his feet hitting the hallway at a run. Lila's door was open, and she sat up in bed, her face pale in the glow of her nightlight. "Daddy, my head hurts." He was beside her in 3 strides, hand on her forehead. She was warm, too warm. "What kind of hurt, baby?" "Like," she whimpered, pressing both hands to her temples. "Like it's squeezing." Tessa appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "What's wrong?" "Headache. She's got a fever." Ethan kept his voice calm, but his mind was already racing. Lila rarely got sick, maybe a cold once a year, nothing serious. But this had come on sudden, and her skin felt clammy. "I'll get the thermometer," Tessa said, disappearing down the hall. It's okay, sweetheart. We're gonna make it better. Ethan stroked Lila's hair, feeling helpless. She leaned against him, and he could feel her trembling. The thermometer read 101.3. High, but not emergency high. Tessa got children's Tylenol and a glass of water while Ethan held Lila upright. She swallowed the medicine, grimacing at the taste, then curled back into her pillows. Try to sleep, Ethan said, pulling the blankets up. The medicine will help. But 20 minutes later, she was throwing up. Ethan held her hair back while she retched into the small trash can, her body heaving. Tessa hovered behind them, her face tight with worry. When Lila finally stopped, gasping and crying, Ethan lifted her gently. We're going to the hospital. Tessa didn't argue. The emergency room at Kootenai Health was fluorescent bright and smelled of disinfectant. Ethan carried Lila through the sliding doors while Tessa handled check-in, his arms aching from holding her, but unwilling to let go. She'd thrown up twice more in the car, and now she lay against his shoulder, whimpering softly. A nurse took them back quickly, perks of a child with obvious distress. They put Lila in a bed with cartoon animals on the curtain, hooked her up to monitors, started asking questions. When did symptoms start? Any known allergies? Recent illnesses? Ethan answered mechanically, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. The doctor who came in was young, early 30s, with tired eyes that suggested a long shift. Dr. Patel, according to her badge. She examined Lila thoroughly, gentle but efficient, asking her simple questions that Lila could barely answer through her tears. We're going to run some tests, Dr. Patel said, turning to Ethan and Tessa. I want to check for a few things, possible virus, food poisoning, maybe environmental exposure. Environmental exposure? Ethan repeated. Chemical fumes, cleaning products, anything new in the house. Sometimes kids get into things. She made notes on her tablet. Has she been around anything unusual recently? New furniture, renovation work, strong-smelling products? Ethan's mind went blank. Their house was old, but nothing new. No painting, no. The doll. He'd noticed it when he'd picked up Lila, a faint chemical smell. He'd thought it was just new plastic, that factory scent that came with cheap toys. But now, wait. He stood abruptly. The toy. The one from today. Tessa looked at him, confused. What toy? The doll. From your mother. Ethan turned to the doctor. It's in the car. Should I? Bring it in. Let me take a look. Ethan ran. The parking lot was dark and cold, and his breath came out in visible puffs as he jogged to their truck. He found the doll in the back seat where Lila had dropped it when she'd gotten sick. He grabbed it, and immediately the smell hit him, stronger now, unmistakable. Chemical. Sharp. Like paint thinner mixed with something synthetic. His hands started shaking. Back inside, Dr. Patel took the doll carefully, holding it at arm's length. She sniffed once, frowned deeply, then set it on the counter away from Lila. Where did this come from? A gift, Ethan said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, distant. From her grandmother. The doctor's frown deepened. She turned the doll over, examining the seams. This isn't from a regular store. See these joints? These are factory seconds, usually dumped cheap. And this smell. She sniffed again, her expression darkening. This could be solvent. Industrial coating that didn't dry properly, or worse, banned chemicals used in manufacturing. We see this sometimes with imports that bypass safety regulations. You're saying this made her sick? Tessa's voice cracked. I'm saying it's a possibility we need to investigate. I want to keep her overnight for observation and get some blood work to check for chemical exposure. Dr. Patel looked at them both, her expression serious. Where exactly did this doll come from? Did you buy it directly? My mother-in-law gave it to her, Ethan said. Each word felt like pulling teeth. For her birthday. This afternoon. Do you know where your mother-in-law purchased it? Ethan looked at Tessa. She was staring at the doll, her face pale. I don't know. She didn't say. I need to file a report on this. If there are more toys like this in circulation, we need to warn people. Dr. Patel picked up the doll again, this time with a gloved hand, and placed it in a clear plastic bag. I'm going to have this analyzed. In the meantime, your daughter needs fluids and monitoring. The good news is we caught this early. but you two need to find out where this came from. They admitted Lila to the pediatric ward. Ethan stayed while Tessa went home to get overnight bags, and he sat in the plastic chair beside his daughter's bed, watching the monitors beep and flash. Lila slept fitfully, her small chest rising and falling beneath the hospital gown, and 4 dripped clear fluid into her arm, and Ethan wanted to rip it out, wanted to rewind time to before the party, before Nancy walked in with her poisonous gift. He kept seeing Nancy's face, that triumphant smile, the way she'd said, "I know what little girls want." Had she known? That seemed impossible. But the doll wasn't from a regular store. Dr. Patel had been clear about that, which meant Nancy had gotten it from somewhere else, somewhere cheap, somewhere that didn't care about safety standards or sick children. Tessa returned an hour later with bags and coffee. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed. She set the bags down and sank into the chair opposite Ethan, staring at Lila. "I called my mother," Tessa said quietly. Ethan's jaw tightened. "And she said she got it at a flea market. Some seller had a bunch of dolls, all brand names supposedly, but heavily discounted. She thought she was getting a deal." Tessa's voice wavered. She didn't know. A flea market. Ethan's voice was flat. She gave her daughter a toy from a flea market. No box, no safety labels, nothing. She didn't know, Tessa repeated, but there was doubt in her voice now. She should have known. Everyone knows you don't buy kids' toys from random vendors. There's a reason they're cheap. Ethan stood, pacing to the window. The night outside was black and empty. Your mother's a grown woman. She's smart. She had to know something was off. Or maybe she was just trying to give Lila something special and made a mistake. Ethan turned to face his wife. A mistake that put our daughter in the hospital. Tessa opened her mouth, closed it. She looked at Lila again, and something crumbled in her expression. I know, okay? But screaming at her isn't going to change what happened. I'm not screaming. Ethan's voice was controlled, cold. But I'm not going to pretend this is okay. Your mother hurt Lila. Maybe not on purpose, but she hurt her. Don't, Tessa's voice broke. Don't make me choose. I'm not making you choose anything. I'm stating a fact. But even as he said it, Ethan knew the battle lines were already drawn. Tessa would defend her mother because that's what she always did. And he would protect his daughter because that's what fathers did. And somewhere in the middle, their marriage was falling apart. They didn't speak much the rest of the night. Tessa dozed in her chair while Ethan watched Lila, counting her breaths, memorizing the sound of the monitors because at least those sounds meant she was alive and stable. Around 4 in the morning, a nurse came to check vitals and adjust the 4, and she gave Ethan a sympathetic look. She's going to be fine, the nurse said softly. Kids are resilient. Ethan nodded, but he didn't believe it. Not really, because resilient didn't mean undamaged. And he was beginning to understand that the real damage was only just starting. They took Lila home 2 days later with instructions to watch for lingering symptoms and avoid the doll, which was now in the custody of the health department for analysis. Lila was quiet on the drive home, staring out the window, and Ethan wondered what she remembered, what she understood. Is Grandma's doll bad? She asked suddenly. Ethan glanced at Tessa, who stared straight ahead. The doll was made wrong, he said carefully. It had stuff in it that made you sick. But you're better now. Grandma didn't mean to? The question stabbed through him. No, baby. She didn't mean to, but that didn't make it better. That afternoon, Ethan looked up the flea market Nancy had mentioned. It was held every weekend in a lot off Highway 95, a sprawling collection of tents and tables selling everything from used tools to questionable electronics. He drove there alone while Lila napped and Tessa did laundry, the silence in the house thick enough to choke on. The market was crowded, and Ethan wandered through the rows until he found a table loaded with toys, action figures, stuffed animals, and yes, dolls like the one Nancy had bought. The seller was a middle-aged man with a cigarette hanging from his lip and a money belt around his waist. How much for the dolls? Ethan asked, keeping his voice neutral. $20. They retail for $60, $70 in stores. Got him straight from the importer. Where's the importer from? The man shrugged. Overseas somewhere. China, Vietnam, who knows? They don't come with boxes, but they're brand new. Kids don't care about boxes. Ethan picked up one of the dolls, turning it over. No manufacturer label. No safety stamp. Nothing. You know these aren't legal to sell, right? Without proper documentation. The man's eyes narrowed. You a cop? No. My daughter got sick from one of these. Ended up in the hospital. That ain't my problem. Lady who bought it didn't ask for no receipt. Because you don't give receipts. Because this is illegal. Ethan set the doll down carefully, fighting the urge to sweep the entire table onto the ground. There's a reason these are cheap. They're coated in toxins. They make kids sick. The man spat on the ground. You got proof. The health department does. They're testing one now. Then talk to them. I'm just selling what I got. The man turned away, dismissive. You want to buy something or not? Ethan left before he did something he'd regret. He sat in his truck, hands gripping the steering wheel, and called the health department. They told him they'd send someone to investigate, took down the location and description of the seller. But the woman on the phone sounded tired, overworked, and Ethan knew how these things went. By next weekend, the seller would be gone, set up somewhere else. The market would claim they didn't know, couldn't track everyone. And Nancy would say she'd been trying to do something nice. He drove to her house without thinking, his body moving on autopilot. Nancy lived in a development on the north side of town, one of those planned communities with identical lawns and HOA restrictions. Her house was cream-colored with black shutters and flower beds that looked professionally maintained. Her Lexus sat in the driveway, gleaming. Ethan knocked hard on the front door. Once, twice. He heard movement inside, footsteps. Then Nancy opened the door wearing a silk robe and an expression of mild annoyance. Ethan, what are you doing here? We need to talk about the doll. Nancy's expression didn't change. I heard Lila got sick. I'm sorry about that. You're sorry. Ethan's voice was flat. The doll you gave her put her in the hospital. It was coated in industrial chemicals, banned materials. I didn't know that. You bought it from a flea market, from some guy selling cheap imports without any safety labels. You had to know something was wrong. Nancy's eyes cooled. I thought I was getting a good deal on a nice toy. I'm sorry if it didn't meet your standards, but I didn't intentionally poison my granddaughter. Your standards? This isn't about standards, Nancy. This is about safety, about not giving kids toxic garbage because it's cheap. Well, forgive me for trying to give Lila something special when her father can barely afford. Don't. Ethan's voice dropped, dangerous. Don't you dare make this about money. Nancy straightened, pulling her robe tighter. I think you should leave. I went to that flea market. I saw the table where you bought that doll. That guy's selling illegal products, Nancy. And you handed one to a 6-year-old like it was perfectly fine. It was a mistake. A mistake that hurt my daughter. Our granddaughter. Nancy's voice turned sharp. Mine too. Do you think I wanted her to get sick? I think you wanted to show me up. I think you wanted to prove you could give Lila something I couldn't. And you didn't care where it came from as long as it made you look good. Nancy's face flushed. Get off my property. You poisoned her. I said get out. Nancy's voice rose, shrill. You come to my house, accuse me of trying to hurt that child, when you're the one who can barely provide for her. She was in the hospital. Ethan shouted. She was throwing up and crying, and they had to hook her up to IVs because of what you gave her. And you're standing here worried about looking bad? I'm not the bad guy here, Ethan. You are. You're the one who can never accept help, who makes everything into a fight, who turns my daughter against me. I haven't turned anyone against anyone. But if you were a better mother, maybe Tessa would see you clearly. The words hung between them, sharp as broken glass. Nancy's face went white, then red. Her hand came up, and for a moment Ethan thought she might actually hit him. But she just pointed toward the street. Leave. Now, before I call the police. Ethan left. Not because he was afraid of the police, but because standing there looking at Nancy's face, that self-righteous, wounded expression, made him feel like he was drowning. He drove home too fast, hands shaking on the wheel, and when he pulled into the driveway, Tessa was standing on the porch, arms crossed. My mother just called, she said. Her voice was ice. Good. Then I know you went to her house and screamed at her. Accused her of trying to hurt Lila. I didn't say she tried. I said she did. Ethan got out of the truck, slammed the door. She bought that doll from a shady vendor selling illegal toys. She didn't check it, didn't care, and it made our daughter sick. Those are facts. You had no right to go there without talking to me first. She's my daughter too, and she's my mother. Tessa's voice cracked. You don't get to attack her just because something went wrong. Something went wrong? Tessa, she could have died. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic? Ethan stared at his wife, and for the first time, he saw a stranger. When did you stop caring about Lila more than your mother's feelings? That's not fair. None of this is fair. Ethan pushed past her into the house. Lila was on the couch, her eyes wide and frightened. Ethan stopped, took a breath, forced his voice down. Hey, sweetheart, want to help me make dinner? Lila nodded, but her eyes kept darting between her parents. That night, after Lila was in bed, Tessa spoke from the bedroom doorway. Mom's coming over tomorrow. To apologize. I don't want her here. It's my house too, and it's Lila's safety. You're being unreasonable. Ethan lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. If that's what you need to believe. I'm not doing this anymore. Tessa's voice wavered. I'm not choosing between you and my mother. I never asked you to choose. I asked you to see what she did. She made a mistake. She keeps making them, and you keep defending her. Ethan sat up, looked at his wife. When is enough going to be enough for you? Tessa didn't answer. She left the room, and a few minutes later, Ethan heard the guest room door close. He didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed listening to the house settle, and he knew with terrible certainty that this was just the beginning. Nancy wouldn't apologize, not really. Tessa wouldn't choose sides. And somewhere in the middle, Lila would keep paying the price. He got up before dawn and packed a bag, just enough for a few days. Clothes, toiletries, his phone charger. He left a note on the kitchen table, staying at Mike's. Need some space. Call if Lila needs me. Then he drove to the garage, parked in the back lot, and slept in his truck until the sun came up and he had to start his shift. It wasn't much, but it was the only way he knew how to stop feeling like he was drowning in his own home. 3 weeks passed in a blur of routine and silence. Ethan stayed at Mike's place. His coworker had an apartment over a storefront downtown with a lumpy couch he didn't mind lending out. Ethan saw Lila every few days, picking her up from school, taking her for ice cream or to the park. She didn't ask why he wasn't home anymore, but he saw the question in her eyes, felt it in the way she hugged him extra tight when he dropped her off. Tessa had stopped calling. They communicated through text, short, functional messages about schedules and pickup times. Nancy's name never came up. Neither did the word divorce, but it hung between them like smoke. The garage became Ethan's refuge. He lost himself in engine work, the simple logic of broken things that could be fixed. Bolt this, tighten that, replace the worn parts. If only marriages worked the same way. It was a Tuesday afternoon when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him swipe to accept. Mr. Rivers? This is Coeur d'Alene Elementary. We need you to come pick up Lila. His heart stopped. Is she sick? Not sick. There's been an incident. The principal wants to speak with you. Ethan was in his truck before the call ended, grease still under his nails, not bothering to clock out. The elementary school was a 20-minute drive that he made in 12, his mind spinning through possibilities. Fight? Accident? Another illness? The receptionist directed him to the nurse's office without explanation. Ethan pushed through the door and found Lila sitting on the examination table, her legs dangling. She looked small, younger than 6, and on her left arm, just above the elbow, was a bruise. Not a small bruise, not the kind kids got from playground roughhousing. This was purple-black, with clear finger marks visible against her pale skin. Ethan's vision tunneled. What happened? The school nurse, a grandmotherly woman named Mrs. Chun, glanced at the principal standing in the corner, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses whose name Ethan couldn't remember through the roaring in his ears. Lila showed this to her teacher during recess. Mrs. Chun said carefully. When we asked her about it, she said her grandmother. Well, perhaps you should talk to her. Ethan knelt in front of his daughter, forcing his voice to stay calm even as his hands shook. Sweetheart, what happened to your arm? Lila's eyes filled with tears. She looked at the adults, then back at her father. Grandma said I was bad. What? I spilled juice on her carpet. The white one in the living room. And she got really mad and she grabbed me and Lila's voice broke. She hit me with her brush. The silver one. The world stopped. Ethan heard the words, understood them on some level, but his brain refused to process. Nancy had hit her, had grabbed his daughter hard enough to leave marks and hit her with a hairbrush. When his voice sounded strange, distant. Saturday, when I stayed over. Saturday, 3 days ago, and no one had told him. Tessa had dropped Lila off at Nancy's like always, like everything was fine, and this had happened, and no one had called him. Mr. Rivers. The principal's voice cut through his thoughts. We're required by law to report suspected child abuse to the authorities. I've already contacted Child Protective Services. They'll want to speak with you and with Lila. Good. Ethan stood, his muscles moving like they belonged to someone else. Can I take her home? Yes, but CPS will need to examine her within 24 hours. They'll call you to schedule. Ethan lifted Lila from the table, careful not to touch her bruised arm. She wrapped her good arm around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder, and he could feel her trembling. It's okay, baby. You did the right thing telling your teacher. You're not in trouble. Is Grandma going to be mad? The question broke something in Ethan's chest. No, Grandma's not going to touch you again. I promise. He carried her to the truck, buckled her into the back seat, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. His hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. He wanted to scream. He wanted to drive to Nancy's house. And, no, not while Lila was with him. Not while she could see. He pulled out his phone and called Tessa. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. A 3rd time, and finally she answered, her voice clipped. What? Your mother hit Lila. Silence. Did you hear me? Your mother left bruises on our daughter. What are you talking about? But there was something in Tessa's voice. Not surprise exactly. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. Saturday, when Lila was at Nancy's. She spilled something, and your mother grabbed her and hit her with a hairbrush hard enough to leave marks. The school called CPS. Ethan's voice was deadly calm. Did you know? I know. Lila didn't say anything. Because she was scared. Because your mother told her she was bad. Ethan's control cracked. How long has this been going on? Nothing's been going on. My mother wouldn't. There are fingerprint bruises on Lila's arm. The nurse photographed them. CPS is investigating. So either your mother did this or someone else did, and we have a bigger problem. Tessa made a sound like a sob. Where is she? Where's Lila? With me. Where she should have been all along. Ethan, don't. Don't what? Protect our daughter? Keep her away from someone who hurts her. His voice dropped. I'm taking her home. The real one, not your mother's. And I'm getting a lawyer. You can't just. Watch me. He hung up. His hands were still shaking, but his mind was clear for the first time in weeks. No more diplomacy. No more trying to keep the peace. Nancy had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and if Tessa couldn't see that, then she'd made her choice. Ethan drove to the house, the rental they'd shared, though he'd stopped thinking of it as home. He half expected Tessa to be there, but the driveway was empty. He took Lila inside, made her a sandwich she didn't eat, and sat with her on the couch while cartoons played that neither of them watched. Dad! Lila's voice was small. Are you and Mom getting divorced? The question punched the air from his lungs. I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe. Because of me? No. He pulled her close, careful of her arm. Never because of you. Adults sometimes, we make mistakes. We hurt each other without meaning to. But none of this is your fault. I didn't mean to spill the juice. I know, baby. And even if you did it on purpose, nobody should ever hit you. Ever. That's a rule. Lila nodded against his chest, and they sat like that until the CPS caseworker arrived an hour later. Her name was Janet Reeves, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She photographed Lila's bruise from multiple angles, asked gentle questions about what happened, how often she saw her grandmother, whether this had happened before. Lila answered haltingly, her voice small, and Ethan wanted to stop it, to shield her from having to relive it. But he knew this was necessary. When Janet finished with Lila, she turned to Ethan. I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. Rivers. This is clear physical abuse. The bruise pattern is consistent with an adult's grip, and combined with your daughter's account, we have enough for a substantiated finding. What does that mean? It means we'll interview the grandmother, conduct a home visit, and determine if charges should be filed. In the meantime, I'm recommending that Lila not have unsupervised contact with Mrs. Bennett. You and your wife will need to ensure that. My wife doesn't believe me. Janet's expression softened. Unfortunately, that's common. Family members often protect each other, even when evidence is clear. But our priority is the child's safety. If your wife allows unsupervised contact against our recommendation, that becomes a separate issue. Can I stop her from seeing Nancy at all? Not legally, unless you have custody orders in place. Right now, both you and your wife have equal parental rights. But I'd strongly advise you to consult a family law attorney. She handed him a business card. In the meantime, I'll follow up within a week. After Janet left, Ethan stood in the empty living room and felt the weight of it all crash down. He needed a lawyer. He needed to file for divorce, for custody, for protection orders. He needed to do all the things he'd been avoiding because he'd hoped, stupidly, that it wouldn't come to this. His phone rang. "Tessa, I talked to my mother," she said when he answered. No greeting, no preamble. And she said Lila's exaggerating, that she barely touched her, just pulled her away from the carpet to stop her from making it worse. There are fingerprint bruises on her arm. Tessa, photograph evidence. A CPS investigation. I'm not saying she's lying, but what? But you're going to take Nancy's word over our daughter's? Over physical evidence. My mother wouldn't hurt Lila. She already did. Ethan's shout echoed in the empty house. He took a breath, forced himself to speak quietly. Lila is terrified. She asked if we're getting divorced and if it's her fault. Because your mother hit her and you're more concerned with defending the person who did it than comforting the child who got hurt. That's not fair. Life isn't fair. But I'm done pretending this is normal. I'm done watching you choose your mother over our daughter. I'm not choosing. Yes, you are. Every time you make excuses for Nancy, every time you dismiss what Lila says, you're choosing. And I can't watch it anymore. Tessa was crying now, harsh sobs that made his chest ache despite his anger. What do you want me to do? I want you to put Lila first. I want you to tell your mother she can't see Lila unsupervised until CPS clears her. I want you to believe your daughter when she says she's been hurt. And if I can't, the question hung between them, awful and final. Then I guess we have our answer, Ethan said quietly. I'm staying here tonight, with Lila. If you want to come home, you can. But if Nancy shows up, I'm calling the police. He hung up before Tessa could respond. That night, he slept in Lila's room, on the floor beside her bed like he used to when she was a toddler afraid of monsters. She fell asleep holding his hand, and he lay awake staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling and thought about all the ways he'd failed to protect her. But that was over now. Whatever it took, whoever he had to fight, Nancy, Tessa, the whole damn town, he would keep Lila safe. He'd lost too much already. He wouldn't lose her too. Morning came gray and cold, the kind of September morning that promised winter was coming early. Ethan woke to Lila's alarm, his back screaming from sleeping on the floor. He made her breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, and watched her eat slowly, carefully, like she was afraid of spilling something. You're allowed to make messes, he said gently. That's what kitchens are for. She gave him a small smile, but kept eating carefully. The doorbell rang at 8. Ethan answered it to find Tessa standing on the porch, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. She looked like she hadn't slept. Can I come in? Ethan stepped aside. Tessa walked past him into the living room, saw Lila at the table, and her face crumpled. She crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Lila into a hug, careful of her arm. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Lila hugged her back, confused but relieved. It's okay, Mommy. No, it's not. Tessa pulled back, looking at her daughter's face. What Grandma did was wrong, and I should have listened to you. I should have protected you. Ethan watched from the doorway, arms crossed. Tessa glanced at him, then back at Lila. Why don't you go watch TV for a bit, sweetheart? Mommy needs to talk to Daddy. Lila looked between them, then nodded and disappeared into the living room. The TV clicked on, some animated show with bright voices. Tessa turned to Ethan, her face streaked with tears. I called my mother this morning, told her what CPS said, and Tessa's voice broke. She admitted it, said Lila was being difficult and she lost her temper. She said she barely grabbed her, that Lila bruises easily, that it wasn't a big deal. Jesus Christ. She doesn't think she did anything wrong. She kept saying kids need discipline, that I was too soft on Lila, that you'd poison me against her. Tessa sank onto the couch, her hands covering her face. How did I not see it? All these years, how did I not see what she was? Ethan sat beside her, keeping space between them. Because she's your mother. Because you wanted to believe the best. I chose her over Lila. Not anymore. You're choosing right now. Tessa looked at him, her eyes desperate. What do? We file for divorce. We establish custody. We make sure Nancy can't be alone with Lila ever again. Ethan's voice was steady, certain. And you tell your mother exactly why. She'll fight back. She'll make it ugly. Then it gets ugly. But I'm not backing down. Not this time. Tessa nodded slowly. Okay. She wiped her face. I'll call a lawyer today. Separately. The word dropped like a stone. Tessa blinked. What? We need separate lawyers. For the divorce. For custody. Ethan met her eyes. I want full custody, Tessa. I can't trust you won't let Nancy near her again. I won't. I swear I won't. You swore a lot of things. You swore you'd protect her. You swore we were a team. Ethan's voice was quiet, sad. I believe you mean it now. But what about next month? Next year? When Nancy's crying to you, telling you she's changed, begging for another chance. I wouldn't. You already did. 3 weeks ago, when she poisoned Lila with that doll, you defended her. Told me I was being unreasonable. Ethan shook his head. I can't risk Lila on hope. Tessa's face crumpled again, but she didn't argue. And that, more than anything, told Ethan he was right. I'll get my own lawyer, she said finally. And I'll fight for partial custody. But I won't fight you on keeping her away from my mother. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what Ethan wanted, which was to rewind time, to never have met Nancy, to have a marriage that worked. But it was something. A starting point. Okay, he said. They sat in silence for a moment, the TV chattering in the background, their daughter watching cartoons like the world wasn't ending. And maybe for her, it wasn't. Maybe kids were resilient the way that nurse said. Maybe Lila would grow up and remember this as the time Daddy protected her, instead of the time Grandma hurt her. Ethan hoped so. God, he hoped so. The divorce took 4 months to finalize. 4 months of lawyers and paperwork and mediation sessions that felt like pulling teeth. Tessa cooperated, more than Ethan expected. She agreed to supervise visitation only when Lila was with Nancy, agreed to joint custody with Ethan as primary caretaker, agreed to split holidays and school events without a fight. Nancy fought every step. She showed up to the CPS interview with her own lawyer, a slick woman in a power suit who argued that Lila was a difficult child who needed firm boundaries. She claimed the bruise was accidental, that she'd merely guided Lila away from the carpet, and the girl's sensitive skin marked easily. She painted Ethan as a vindictive ex-son-in-law with a grudge, Tessa as a daughter manipulated against her own mother. The caseworker didn't buy it. Janet Reeves' report was damning. Detailed accounts from Lila, photographs of the bruise with clear finger patterns, testimony from the school nurse and Lila's teacher about behavioral changes. Most damaging was what Janet found during her investigation. Nancy had been reselling imported goods at local flea markets and online for years. Cheap electronics, knockoff designer bags, and yes, toys. Lots of toys. When CPS searched Nancy's house with a warrant, they found boxes in her garage, dozens of dolls like the one she'd given Lila, still wrapped in plastic, no safety labels, no manufacturer information. They found a ledger documenting cash sales, tax-free income Nancy had never reported. They found cleaning supplies and industrial solvents stored improperly near children's items. The local health department got involved. Then the FDA. Then, because some of the toys were confirmed as stolen intellectual property, the FBI. Nancy Bennett, respected realtor and upstanding community member, was arrested on charges of child endangerment, fraud, trafficking in counterfeit goods, and tax evasion. The trial was scheduled for November. Ethan tried not to feel satisfaction at the news, but he couldn't help it. Every charge, every indictment felt like validation. He hadn't been crazy. He hadn't been paranoid. Nancy was exactly what he'd seen. A selfish, reckless woman who cared more about appearance than safety, more about control than love. The town didn't know what to think. Nancy had been a fixture in Coeur d'Alene for 20 years, had sold half the houses in the county. People who'd known her, trusted her, couldn't reconcile the friendly realtor with the woman facing federal charges. Some rallied to her defense. Others quietly stopped returning her calls. Ethan's business at the garage picked up. Small gestures, a neighbor bringing his truck in, a former customer returning with a referral. Word spread that he'd stood up for his daughter against his mother-in-law, and in a small town, that mattered. He was the good guy, the protective father. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired. Lila started therapy in October. Twice a week, Ethan drove her to a child psychologist in town, a gentlewoman named Dr. Lee who specialized in trauma. Lila didn't talk much about the sessions, but slowly, gradually, things improved. She smiled more, stopped flinching when people reached for her, started drawing again, bright, happy pictures of trees and animals instead of the dark, angry scribbles she'd made for weeks after the incident. Ethan counted every small victory. Tessa saw Lila every other weekend, and the visits were civil, even warm. She'd cut ties with Nancy completely, changed her locks, blocked her number, refused to visit her in jail. She told Ethan once, during a pickup exchange, that she felt like she'd woken up from fog. "I don't know how I let it get that bad," Tessa said, her voice small. "I knew she was controlling. I knew she criticized you constantly. But I thought that was just how mothers were." "Some mothers," Ethan corrected. "Not all. My therapist says I was in a cycle. That Nancy conditioned me from childhood to always put her feelings first." Tessa looked at Lila, who was collecting her overnight bag from the back seat. "I did the same thing to Lila. Expected her to accommodate, to accept, to never complain. You're changing that now." "I hope so." Tessa smiled sadly. "She's better with you. Happier." Ethan didn't disagree. It was true. Lila bloomed in the small house he'd rented by the lake, a tiny 2-bedroom with a dock and a rowboat that barely floated. She helped him fish, learned to identify birds, made friends with the neighbor's dog. She was still 6, still healing, but she was laughing again. That was enough. The trial started on a Wednesday in November, cold and overcast. Ethan took the day off work to attend, leaving Lila with Mike's wife. He sat in the back of the courtroom and watched Nancy's lawyer attempt to mount a defense. It crumbled quickly. The prosecution had evidence, boxes of toys, lab reports showing toxic chemicals, financial records, testimony from health officials. They had Lila's medical records from the hospital. They had photographs of the bruise. They had a dozen vendors from various flea markets who identified Nancy as a regular seller of questionable goods. Most damaging, they had testimony from a warehouse worker who confirmed that Nancy had purchased bulk shipments of banned toys knowingly, aware that they'd been flagged by customs, but slipped through due to paperwork errors. She'd known they were dangerous. She'd sold them anyway. The child endangerment charge stuck. So did fraud and tax evasion. The counterfeit trafficking was harder to prove. Nancy's lawyer argued she'd been deceived by her supplier, but the jury didn't care. They saw a woman who'd poisoned her own granddaughter for profit. Nancy was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and 5 years probation. She'd also have to pay restitution to the victims, including Ethan's family for medical bills, and would be banned from selling goods online or at markets permanently. The judge's words were harsh. "You exploited the trust of your community and endangered children for personal gain. This court finds your actions reprehensible and your lack of remorse disturbing." Nancy's face remained impassive throughout. No tears, no apologies. When they let her out in handcuffs, she didn't look back. Ethan watched her go and felt nothing. Not triumph, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just emptiness where anger used to be. He went home that evening to find Lila on the dock, dangling her feet in the cold water. He sat beside her, and they watched the sun set over the lake in silence. "Did Grandma go away?" Lila asked finally. Ethan had told her about the trial in simple terms. Grandma had done bad things, and now she had to take responsibility. He hadn't used words like prison or guilty, but Lila was smart. She understood more than he gave her credit for. Yes, sweetheart. She went away. For how long? A while. A few years. Lila nodded, processing. Will she say sorry when she comes back? Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to lie, to promise that Nancy would change, would apologize, would become the grandmother Lila deserved. But he'd spent too much time protecting Lila from hard truths. She needed to know the real world, even the ugly parts. I don't know, he said honestly. Some people don't say sorry, even when they should. They don't think they did anything wrong. That's sad. Yeah, it is. But we're okay, right? You and me. Ethan pulled her close, and she leaned into him, warm and solid and real. We're more than okay, baby. We're good. And they were. The months that followed were quiet. Ethan worked, Lila went to school, and they built a life that was smaller than before, but infinitely more peaceful. No drama, no fights, no walking on eggshells. Just morning routines and bedtime stories and lazy Saturdays fishing off the dock. Tessa visited regularly, and slowly, carefully, she rebuilt her relationship with Lila. It would never be what it was before. Trust, once broken, didn't heal perfectly. But it grew back different, maybe stronger in some ways. Tessa learned to listen, to apologize, to put Lila's needs before her own ego. Ethan watched his ex-wife change and felt something like hope. Maybe people could grow. Maybe damage wasn't always permanent. One evening in March, nearly a year after that cursed birthday party, Lila asked if she could go to her friend's house for a sleepover. Please, Dad. Emma's mom said we can make pizza and watch movies. Ethan hesitated. Sleepovers meant being away, meant trusting someone else to keep her safe. But he'd met Emma's mother, a kind woman who worked as a teacher, who spoke gently to children and had rules about screen time and bedtimes. And Lila's eyes were so hopeful. Okay, he said, but you call me if anything feels wrong, deal? Deal. Lila packed her bag with the careful precision she'd developed, making sure she had everything she needed. No surprises, no forgotten items. She'd become meticulous after everything with Nancy, a coping mechanism, Dr. Lee said. Control what you can control. Ethan drove her to Emma's house and watched her run inside, already laughing. Emma's mother waved from the porch, mouthing, "Don't worry," and making a call me gesture. He drove home to the empty house and realized this was the first night in a year he'd be alone. Really alone, no Lila sleeping in the next room, no ex-wife texting about schedules. Just him and the quiet. He made dinner, a steak he wouldn't have to cut into small pieces, a beer he could drink slowly without worrying about being needed. He ate on the dock as the sun set, the lake reflecting orange and pink and purple. The world felt vast and small at the same time, full of terrible things and beautiful moments existing side by side. His phone buzzed. A text from Lila, sent from Emma's mother's phone. Having fun? Love you, Dad. Ethan smiled and typed back, "Love you too, sweetheart. See you tomorrow." He sat there until stars came out, until the air turned cold enough that he needed a jacket. And for the first time in a long time, he thought about the future not with dread, but with something like anticipation. Lila was healing. He was healing. And maybe that was enough. The lake lapped to the dock posts, a rhythmic sound that felt like breathing. Ethan stood and stretched, his back popping, and headed inside. Tomorrow he'd pick up Lila, hear all about her sleepover, probably field requests for more sleepovers. And he'd say yes, because that's what normal childhoods looked like. Friends and fun and trust that the world wasn't always dangerous. He'd given her that. Not a perfect life, not a fairy tale, but safety, agency, the knowledge that when something was wrong, people would believe her. That was more than some kids got, more than Tessa had gotten growing up with Nancy. And maybe that's what breaking cycles meant. Not perfection, but conscious choice. Doing better even when it was hard, even when it cost you. Ethan locked the door and turned off the lights. In the darkness, the house felt peaceful rather than empty. He lay in bed and fell asleep easily, dreamlessly, secure in the knowledge that he'd done what fathers were supposed to do. He'd protected his daughter, and that was everything. 3 years later, everything changed again, but this time for the better. Lila was 9 now, taller and more confident. She'd made the school's art program, her drawings earning spots in the hallway displays. She had friends, real friends, the kind who invited her to birthday parties and called her on weekends. The bruise on her arm had long since faded, but the memory of that time lingered in small ways. She never played with dolls anymore. Always checked the source of gifts before accepting them. Asked questions when something seemed off. Ethan encouraged it. He'd rather have a skeptical daughter than a vulnerable one. The divorce had been finalized for over 2 years. Ethan had full custody, Tessa had visitation, and they'd fallen into a rhythm that felt almost normal. They'd never be friends, exactly, but they'd learned to co-parent with minimal friction. Tessa had moved to Boise, taking a job at a law firm, starting fresh somewhere Nancy's shadow didn't reach. She drove up twice a month to see Lila, and the visits were good. Healing. Nancy had been released from federal prison 6 months ago, after serving her full sentence with no early parole. She'd been required to attend anger management classes, substance abuse counseling. They'd found evidence of prescription medication abuse during her incarceration, and parenting classes. None of it had changed her fundamental nature. She'd sent one letter to Lila, delivered through Tessa. Ethan had read it first, as was his right under the custody agreement. The letter was 2 pages of self-justification and veiled accusations. Nancy claimed she'd been railroaded by an unjust system, that certain people had turned her family against her, that she'd only ever wanted what was best for everyone. No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no understanding of why she'd been punished. Ethan had put the letter in a folder and told Lila she'd received something from her grandmother, and when Lila was older, she could decide if she wanted to read it. But not now, not when she was finally doing well. Lila had simply nodded and gone back to drawing. Nancy tried to petition for visitation rights through her probation officer. The request was denied. She tried to reach out through mutual friends, through social media, through carefully worded emails to Tessa. Every attempt was documented, every boundary violation reported to her parole officer. Ethan had learned, over the past 3 years, that you didn't have to forgive people who hurt you. You didn't have to give them chances to do it again. Setting boundaries wasn't cruel. It was self-preservation. And teaching Lila that lesson was more important than maintaining a relationship with someone toxic. He'd worried, in the early days, that Lila would resent him for keeping Nancy away, that she'd grow up thinking he'd stolen her grandmother from her. But Dr. Lee had assured him that children understood more than adults gave them credit for. They knew when someone hurt them. They knew when someone made them feel small and scared. Lila had been the one to ask, at age 7, why Grandma couldn't visit. Because Grandma hurt you, Ethan had said simply. And people who hurt you don't get to be part of your life until they prove they've changed. Really changed, not just saying sorry. Has she? Lila had asked. No. Okay. And that had been that. Now, at 9, Lila rarely mentioned Nancy. She had other things to focus on: school, friends, her art. She'd recently discovered fishing, and most weekends found them on the dock with poles and a cooler of sandwiches, talking about everything and nothing. It was during one of these fishing trips, on a Saturday in early summer, that Lila asked the question Ethan had been expecting for years. Dad, why did Grandma hate you so much? Ethan reeled in his lines slowly, thinking. The water was calm today, mirror smooth. She didn't hate me, he said finally. She hated that I saw her clearly. What do you mean? Your grandmother, she spent a lot of energy making people think she was perfect. Nice house, nice car, nice manners. But underneath, she wasn't a nice person. She was selfish and mean, and she hurt people. Ethan set his pole aside and looked at his daughter. I saw that, and I wouldn't pretend I didn't. And people like your grandmother, they can't stand mirrors. Lila thought about this, her young face serious. So she hurt me because of you? No. Ethan's voice was firm. She hurt you because of her. Because she's a person who hurts people when they don't do what she wants. It was never your fault. It was never about you being bad or difficult or anything else. It was about her being broken in a way she refuses to fix. That's sad. Yeah, it is. But we're better without her, right? Ethan smiled. We're a lot better. Lila nodded and went back to her fishing pole. The conversation apparently settled in her mind. Ethan watched her, this strong, clear-eyed girl who'd survived something she shouldn't have had to survive and felt grateful. Not for what had happened. He'd never be grateful for that. But for who Lila was becoming despite it. That evening, after Lila had gone to bed, Ethan sat on the porch with a beer and watched the stars come out. The house behind him was small, but paid for. He'd bought it last year, his first real investment. The mortgage was manageable on his mechanic salary, especially since business at Morrison's had picked up. He'd been promoted to shop manager, a title that came with a modest raise and health insurance that actually covered things. His phone buzzed. A text from Tessa. "How's our girl?" Ethan smiled and typed back. "Good. Really good. Caught a fish today. She made me take 50 pictures. I want to see them all." He sent the photos, Lila grinning and holding up a small base, her face alight with pride. Tessa responded with a heart emoji and a message. "She looks so happy." "She is." There was a pause, then, "Thank you. For everything. For being strong when I couldn't be." Ethan stared at the message, surprised. Tessa didn't usually get sentimental. "You got there eventually. That's what matters. But you were there from the start. You protected her when I was too weak. I'll never stop being grateful for that." Ethan didn't know how to respond, so he sent a simple, "She's our daughter." It's what parents do. Another pause. Then, not all parents. Some people never choose their kids over themselves. She was talking about Nancy, of course. About the choice Ethan had forced her to make and the one she'd eventually made correctly. He understood what she was really saying. That she'd grown, that she'd learned, that she knew how close they'd come to losing everything that mattered. "Good night, Tessa." "Good night, Ethan. Hug Lila for me." He would. He did every night before bed. A ritual they developed in those early days after everything fell apart. He'd tuck her in, kiss her forehead, and say, "I love you, sweetheart. You're safe." And she'd say, "I love you too, Dad," and fall asleep with the nightlight on and the door cracked open. Simple, consistent, safe. Ethan finished his beer and stood, stretching. The air smelled like pine and water, clean and uncomplicated. Inside, the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. He checked the locks, a habit he'd never quite broken, and turned off the lights one by one. Before going to his own room, he stopped at Lila's door. She was asleep, sprawled across her bed with art supplies scattered on the floor and a half-finished drawing on her desk. He picked his way through the mess and pulled her blanket up, tucking it around her shoulders. She stirred but didn't wake. Her face was peaceful, untroubled. No nightmares tonight. Maybe no nightmares ever again, if he was lucky. "Sweet dreams, baby," he whispered, and then, because it needed to be said even if she couldn't hear it, "You're the best thing I ever did." He left the door cracked and went to his own room, where sleep came easily and dreams were rare. In the darkness, the house breathed around him, and Ethan Rivers, mechanic, father, survivor, finally truly rested. 5 years later, when Lila turned 14, she asked about visiting Nancy. Ethan said she could when she turned 18, when she was old enough to make that choice with full understanding. Lila thought about it and said, "Maybe, but probably not." Nancy never apologized. She lived out her probation in a small apartment across town, working part-time at a call center, bitter and alone. She died at 73 of a heart attack, having never reconciled with her daughter or granddaughter. Ethan attended the funeral because Tessa asked him to. Lila didn't go. She sent flowers, white roses, polite and impersonal. The card read simply, "Goodbye." Afterward, Ethan asked if she was okay. Lila, 18 now and preparing for college, shrugged. "I'm fine. She was just someone I used to know." And that was that. The end of Nancy Bennett's hold on their family. The end of the cycle. Lila went to art school on a scholarship. She thrived. She created. She was happy. And Ethan, watching her grow into a strong, confident woman who stood up for herself and others, knew he'd done right. Not perfectly. There had been mistakes, delays, moments where he'd doubted himself. But in the end, when it mattered most, he'd chosen correctly. He'd chosen his daughter, and she'd chosen herself. Chosen healing over bitterness, strength over victimhood, a future unshackled from the past. That was all he'd ever wanted. That was everything.